It was a typical morning in Washington, D.C., but tension hung in the air like smoke over a battlefield. The House Oversight Committee had convened for what was expected to be a routine hearing, at least on the surface. But those in the know, those who tracked every ripple of American politics, knew this was no ordinary day. The center of it all was Congressman Byron Donalds, the sharp-tongued, no-nonsense Republican firebrand representing Florida's 19th district. Known for his unapologetic support of President Donald J. Trump and his relentless pursuit of truth in government, Donalds had made waves in the past. But today he was about to unleash a political tsunami. Across from him sat Letitia James, the current Attorney General of New York. Her reputation preceded her, a fierce progressive with a track record of using her office to target conservatives, especially Trump. Her lawsuits and investigations into Trump's finances had made headlines for years, painting her as both hero and villain depending on who you asked. The hearing was officially about ethical oversight and legal accountability in high-ranking state officials. In reality, it was shaping up to be a political showdown of national consequence. As the camera lights came on and C-SPAN began broadcasting live, Americans tuned in across the country. From truck stops in Ohio to diners in Texas to Wall Street boardrooms and small-town churches, the name Byron Donalds was trending on social media even before he spoke. He adjusted the microphone and looked straight at Letitia James. His voice was calm, yet carried a weight that hushed the room. "Ms. James," he began, "you've used your position as Attorney General not as a servant of the law, but as a weapon against political opponents, specifically one man. The President of the United States." Gasps echoed faintly in the room. Letitia James remained poised, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "We have reviewed thousands of documents from your office," Donalds continued. "And within those files, we discovered something that should alarm every American, evidence that your investigations were politically motivated, coordinated with partisan groups, and even pre-planned before any official wrongdoing was alleged." Suddenly, he held up a thick folder marked confidential. The room tilted. "These documents," he said, "include internal emails, text messages, and memos indicating that your office was in contact with representatives of left-wing activist organizations and campaign operatives during your so-called independent investigation into President Trump." Letitia James shifted in her chair, but still did not speak. "One email dated February 12th, well before you filed any charges, shows a staffer from your office asking a legal advisor at Democracy Justice League, quote, 'How should we frame this to tie Trump to fraud before we get the audit results?'" The room erupted in murmurs. Chairman Jim Jordan called for order. But it was already too late. The fire had started. Donalds turned to the panel. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not legal pursuit, this is political persecution. And if we do not act, we normalize weaponizing justice against our own citizens." Cameras flashed. Social media exploded. Hashtag Byron exposes James and hashtag Letitia leaks started trending in real time. Outside, reporters swarmed the Capitol steps, sensing that what had begun as a simple hearing was evolving into a full-blown scandal that could rattle the nation. President Trump, watching from the White House, reportedly leaned back in his chair and smirked. "It's about time," he said, according to an aide. Inside the chamber, Letitia James finally spoke. "Congressman Donalds, your accusations are serious and dangerously misleading. My office has always acted within the bounds of the law." "That's not what your emails say," Donalds fired back. Then, without missing a beat, he pulled out a flash drive. "I am submitting this drive to the committee, which contains over 3,000 documents obtained through legal channels, whistleblowers, and FOIA requests. Let the American people decide." A wave of audible shock passed through the room. The chairman accepted the drive, but everyone knew the story was no longer confined to Washington. This was about to become a national reckoning. The chamber buzzed with tension as Byron Donalds leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of his revelation settle. Letitia James sat still, her hands folded, but her demeanor had shifted. For the first time in the hearing, she wasn't leading the tempo, she was reacting. Americans watching at home were already split down ideological lines. Conservatives celebrated Donald's audacity, calling him a patriot on social media. Liberals scrambled to defend James, claiming the documents were out of context. But in Washington, perception was power, and Donalds had just changed the battlefield, but he wasn't done. "Chairman Jordan," Donalds said, "I'd like to call our next witness. He's someone who served in the office of the Attorney General of New York until just 3 months ago. He's come forward voluntarily, despite personal risk, because he could no longer remain silent." A tall man with graying hair and a worn expression stepped up to the witness table. Cameras zoomed in as he adjusted the microphone. "Please state your name for the record," Jordan requested. "My name is Marcus Bell," he said. "I served as deputy legal advisor in the AG's Financial Crimes Bureau." Letitia James subtly looked away. "Mr. Bell," Donalds began, "in your capacity, did you ever witness or receive directives that indicated political motives behind the investigations of Donald Trump or affiliated businesses?" Bell nodded solemnly. "Yes, I did. On several occasions, high-ranking officials discussed how certain actions would play in the media. We were instructed to pursue leads that would generate headlines, even when those leads had weak legal grounding." Gasps again. One Democratic member tried to object, but Jordan motioned for order. "Can you give us an example?" Donalds asked. Bell opened a manila folder. Inside were printed Slack messages and emails. "This message is from a senior official. If we drop this now, we'll lose MSNBC's momentum. Keep digging until we get something usable." Another message reads, "Don't worry about admissibility. We're not trying this in court yet. We're trying it in public opinion." Letitia James finally spoke. "This is cherry picking. Context matters. These are snippets, not full conversations, and yet," Donalds interrupted, "the context seems pretty clear, ma'am. You were building a narrative, not a case." He continued, "Mr. Bell, did you ever file a complaint internally?" "Yes. I raised ethical concerns in a confidential memo to the chief of staff. Weeks later, I was reassigned to a basement office with no case responsibilities. That's when I resigned." The room fell into a heavy silence. Even Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, seated a few rows down, seemed visibly disturbed, not at Donalds, but at the growing implications. Donalds addressed the panel again. "Let me be clear. This isn't about being pro-Trump or anti-Trump. This is about whether the law is being used as a political cudgel. If one AG can do this to a former president, what's stopping them from doing it to ordinary Americans?" Journalists outside were now calling it the bombshell hearing. Fox News broke into regular programming. CNN aired the hearing with an emergency analysis panel. Even the New York Times had to admit this was no longer business as usual. In the back of the room, Caroline Leavitt, now serving as President Trump's press secretary, could be seen furiously typing into her phone. A tweet from her account followed seconds later. "Congressman Donalds just blew the lid off the corruption in New York's justice system. This is why President Trump fights. For truth. For fairness. For you." Hashtag Letitia exposed. Back in the chamber, Donalds held up one last document. "This," he said, "is a memo drafted weeks before your official announcement of the Trump investigation. It contains talking points, potential charges, and coordination with select media outlets. It proves premeditated political assault under the veil of justice." Letitia James looked directly at him now. "You're endangering the integrity of law enforcement," she said. "No," Donalds shot back. "You already did that. I'm just turning the lights on." A standing ovation broke out from some spectators in the room, an unprecedented scene in a congressional hearing, and across America, eyes widened. For the first time, Letitia James wasn't just a headline, she was a suspect in the court of public opinion. The moment Byron Donalds concluded his remarks, the chamber fell into a strained hush. Then came the flood. Media outlets scrambled to update their homepages. Phones buzzed endlessly inside congressional offices. White House staffers moved quickly to capitalize on the moment. In Washington, perception isn't just part of the game, it is the game. And in a single hearing, Donalds had managed to flip the narrative on its head. Overnight, hashtag Letitia James resigned became the top trending hashtag on X, formerly Twitter. Conservative commentators praised Donalds as a future speaker and a truth teller in a sea of political theater. Even centrist news outlets were forced to ask, had Letitia James gone too far in targeting political enemies? Inside the West Wing, President Donald J. Trump was unusually quiet, focused, staring at a wall-mounted television tuned to Newsmax. Byron Donalds was on screen replaying his testimony from just hours earlier. "Mr. President," an aide said cautiously, "should we release a statement?" Trump turned slowly, lips pursed, then grinned. "No," he said. "Let Byron keep talking. He's doing what DOJ wouldn't. He's waking America up." Elsewhere in D.C., Democratic leadership gathered in closed-door meetings. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was livid. "We are not going to let this grandstanding turn into an inquisition," he thundered, though deep down, he understood the damage had been done. But what really shook Washington wasn't the hearing. It was what followed the next morning. At precisely 9 a.m., the Washington Herald broke a front-page bombshell. Exclusive, Whistleblower documents reveal pre-election coordination between Letitia James' office and political PACs. The exposé, citing parts of the same evidence Donalds had submitted, revealed that James' office had held private, information-sharing briefings with representatives from two prominent Democratic super PACs before her office had even announced the Trump investigation. These meetings were off the record, not logged on her official calendar, and focused specifically on legal strategies that could damage Trump's 2024 campaign. Among the leaked memos, notes from a staffer stating, "This move could kneecap Trump's re-election finances if we time it around Q4." Another memo, "Coordinate with Brooklyn PAC Group press releases. Let them lead media framing." Even legal experts on both sides admitted this was a serious ethical breach, potentially even criminal under state statutes barring coordination between prosecutors and political entities. By late afternoon, Representative Jim Jordan scheduled an emergency session of the Oversight Committee to expand the scope of the investigation. The word subpoenas began flying. And Byron Donalds? He wasn't done. Appearing on Hannity, Donalds doubled down. "We're talking about one of the most powerful prosecutors in America using her office like a campaign war room. This isn't just unethical, it's election interference. Period." Sean Hannity leaned forward. "Are you calling for her resignation?" "I'm calling for a federal investigation," Donalds replied. "This goes beyond politics. This is a threat to justice itself." Back in New York, Letitia James attempted damage control. Her office issued a firm denial. "The Attorney General has always acted within the law. These allegations are politically motivated and rooted in distortion." But the damage was done. Protesters gathered outside her office demanding transparency. Former allies began distancing themselves. Even a few Democratic state officials quietly criticized her conduct in anonymous statements to the press. That night, during a nationally televised address, Caroline Leavitt, press secretary to President Trump, laid into the scandal. While the Biden DOJ turned a blind eye for years, it took a bold congressman from Florida to peel back the curtain and expose the rot. This is why President Trump fights, to restore justice for every American, not just the elites. Byron Donalds, now a household name, was approached by reporters as he left his D.C. office. "Congressman, what's next?" He stopped, looked directly into the cameras. "Next, we follow the truth wherever it leads." And America watched, holding its breath. The following morning, Washington, D.C. awoke to a rare bipartisan unease. The fallout from the hearing hadn't subsided, it had intensified. News networks on both sides of the political spectrum were forced to reckon with the growing mountain of evidence. Thanks to the whistleblower Marcus Bell and Congressman Byron Donalds' methodical release of documentation on Capitol Hill, a stunned silence overtook several Democratic offices. Some staffers were privately advising their bosses to distance fast, while others scrambled to review past endorsements and quotes praising Letitia James' investigation into Donald Trump. The risk of political blowback was no longer theoretical, it was statistical. Byron Donalds, meanwhile, was already preparing for his next move. With support from Chairman Jim Jordan, he began coordinating with House Judiciary members to issue formal requests for testimony from two senior aides to Letitia James, as well as representatives from the political PACs named in the Washington Herald exposé. "This is not a show trial," Donald said in a press conference outside the Capitol. "This is accountability, and we are going to see this through, for the sake of the American people and the rule of law." President Trump's administration wasted no time reinforcing the narrative. In a rare direct statement from the Oval Office, Trump delivered a short televised address. "We now have undeniable proof that Democrat operatives and corrupt state officials conspired to take down not just me, but the will of the people. They failed. And now it's their turn to answer questions. I want to personally thank Congressman Byron Donalds for his courage. He's a patriot, and what he's doing, believe me, is just the beginning." Letitia James, under siege, tried to mount a counteroffensive. She appeared in a press conference flanked by Democratic lawmakers from her home state. Her tone was defiant, but the cracks were showing. "I have never allowed politics to dictate justice. What we're seeing here is a coordinated political hit job aimed at silencing independent prosecutors." But her words rang hollow, especially after a new leak landed like a lightning bolt. The Daily Ledger, a conservative investigative outlet, published a recorded Zoom call between AG office staff and operatives from a group called Justice 2024, a PAC linked to Democrat fundraising operations. On the call, a senior official from James' office was heard saying, "Let's make sure this next wave lands around the RNC. If we time this right, it'll dominate the news cycle." The recording, allegedly obtained by another whistleblower, sent shockwaves across every major network. MSNBC went into damage control mode. CNN brought on constitutional lawyers to dissect the implications. Even The Atlantic, no friend of Trump, published an editorial titled, "The Weaponization of Justice Has Consequences." In private, several New York legislators began whispering about a formal inquiry into the Attorney General's office. Rumors swirled that Governor Kathy Hochul was deeply disturbed by the developments and might be preparing a statement of her own. On Capitol Hill, Democrats began breaking ranks. Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin, a Democrat from Michigan, said on CNN, "I've respected AG James for years, but if these allegations are true, we need a full and independent investigation. The public trust must be protected." Meanwhile, Donald's office released a timeline to the press, mapping the exact coordination between Letitia James' probes and key political events. The graphics showed patterns that couldn't be ignored. Charges or media leaks almost always corresponded with Trump campaign milestones, Republican conventions, or high-dollar GOP fundraisers. IT wasn't just a drip of evidence anymore. IT was a flood in the wake of the storm. An emergency session was scheduled by House leadership. Byron Donalds would now lead a bipartisan subcommittee aimed at investigating political interference by state officials. And then came the biggest twist yet. A federal judge in the Southern District of New York, reviewing a prior case against Trump brought by James' office, issued a stay order, putting the judgment on hold pending a review of newly discovered evidence that suggested prosecutorial misconduct. Legal analysts described it as unprecedented. For Donalds, it was vindication. For James, it was a warning shot. And for the American people, it was confirmation that something had gone deeply wrong in the system they were told to trust. The atmosphere in Washington had shifted. No longer was this just a political skirmish. It had evolved into a full-blown constitutional crisis. For the first time in recent memory, the conversation was no longer about partisanship or policy. It was about justice itself. The man at the center of it all? Congressman Byron Donalds. A freshman no more, he had become a national symbol of accountability, revered by conservatives, feared by those who underestimated him. 3 days after the federal judge's stay order against Letitia James' case, Byron Donalds opened the first official session of the Subcommittee on Prosecutorial Integrity and Political Interference. Members included both Republicans and cautious Democrats who could no longer defend what had become indefensible. In the opening remarks, Donalds spoke directly to the American people. Our justice system cannot function when it is manipulated by those in power for political gain. We are not here to conduct vengeance, we are here to restore trust. When justice becomes a tool of ideology, no citizen is safe. The first witness, another whistleblower, this time, a data analyst from the AG's digital communications team, who revealed something chilling. He testified that Letitia James' office used a proprietary algorithm to track social media sentiment, timing press releases and leaks to inflict maximum reputational harm on political opponents, including Trump. Internal memos showed that the goal was not just prosecution, but perception manipulation. It was about optics, he said. We were told to win the news cycle, not the courtroom. That testimony was the nail in the coffin. Even President Trump, never shied away released a second statement. The deep state thought it could silence us. But Byron Donalds showed the world the truth. We don't need a justice system that bends to media pressure. We need one that stands on the Constitution. The pressure reached a boiling point. Calls for Letitia James' resignation exploded. In Albany, state lawmakers, some reluctantly, began circulating a resolution of censure, which would mark the first step toward formal impeachment under New York law. And then, it happened. At a hastily called press conference outside her Manhattan office, Letitia James stepped to the podium, eyes weary, jaw tight. She read from a prepared statement, her voice strained but composed. While I maintain that my actions were always in pursuit of justice, I recognize the immense distraction this has become for the office of the Attorney General. Therefore, I am submitting my resignation, effective immediately. Reporters shouted questions, but she walked away in silence. The ripple effects were immediate. Within hours, markets responded positively. Trump allies celebrated. Democrats pivoted, distancing themselves with practiced statements about the importance of institutional integrity. But for many Americans, regardless of political allegiance, it wasn't about party anymore. It was about finally seeing a powerful figure held accountable not by a courtroom but by the truth. Outside the Capitol, hundreds gathered for a candlelight vigil, not to protest, but to celebrate. One woman, holding a small flag, told a local news crew, "We finally saw justice not being used as a weapon. That's what freedom looks like." Inside his modest office, Byron Donalds sat quietly, reviewing the final draft of the committee's findings. The report was over 300 pages long, detailing misconduct, political coordination, and ethical violations that would be taught in law schools for years to come. A staffer knocked gently. "Sir, Fox and CNN both want statements. You've got Hannity on line 1 and Jake Tapper on line 2. Donald smiled, shook his head. "Let 'em wait. Justice comes first." He leaned back in his chair, gazing out the window toward the Capitol dome. America, battered but resilient, had been reminded of something important. Truth matters. Even in a swamp as deep as D.C., a voice willing to speak out, armed with facts, not fury, could still move mountains. And in that moment, Byron Donalds wasn't just a congressman from Florida. He was the man who had looked corruption in the eye and said, "No more."